John Wesley was an organizational genius.
Yeah.
He realized that he could build a great organization that would outlast him and it would outpass what he could do by himself. And he would design circuit routes. He would coach and pick and develop circuit riders.
Yeah.
I mean, so he had that.
And he had a system for development too. I mean, you were telling me the other day that he had a library upstairs in his house. So when the circuit riders came by his home, so not only did he select the right people, he developed them and fed them constantly too.
I mean, he was essentially podcasting before podcasting was a thing. It was bookcasting.
It was book, yeah.
He's a prolific writer, prolific speaker. I can't remember the number of times he would speak in a week, but it was like you do the math, and it's like dude was speaking multiple times a day for every day of the week, for every day of the year, like over the course of decades to be able to hit the number that he did in the course of his life.
Yeah.
So he had this prolific output, but he still developed the best people. It was crazy.
So we're talking about John Wesley selecting the right people, and obviously he had a huge impact on Christianity and reaching people. You met with a modern day leader recently, you know, Mark Miller at Chick-fil-a.
Yeah.
And why were you meeting with him?
So it was actually tied to Wesley. I'm finishing up my doctorate, and one of the things that in my doctorate I studied history of revivals and movements, and I remember seeing two men, John Wesley and George Whitefield, and comparing and contrasting and realizing that John Wesley had skills and passions and perspective on leadership that Whitefield did not.
Yeah.
Whitefield was a person. Wesley was a developer.
Yes.
And so that set this project that I'm working on, how to develop and disciple and create a course that shapes people to live out their faith. And so I decided I want to go beyond the church. The church is trying to make people into the image of the church's founder.
Right.
And I said, who else is doing that really well? And I realized there are 3 organizations in America who are trying to shape their employees into the image of their founder. Amazon, Disney, and Chick-fil-a.
Yeah.
And
doing a good job of it too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of leading their sector. Disney's dead. Bezos would probably call us a security guard. Truett Cathy's passed away, but one of the guys who's been instrumental in Chick-fil-a and that process is Mark Miller. Yeah. And I happened to read a book. Oh, yeah. And in one of his books, he puts, here's my cell phone number. I'd love to connect with you. I texted him.
Wow. That's how you connected with him?
That's how I connected. I found his phone.
I did not know
It was like the last page of the book. He's like, if you made it this far, congratulations.
No.
Yeah. I was like, is this really his cell phone number?
Yeah.
So I texted it. I mean, I wrote out my thing and I was like, hey, if this is really you, like, this is really me, could we connect?
Yeah.
And like 2 days later, I get a text message from him.
No.
And he said, I would love to talk to you. And it really was him.
Yeah. And so you flew to Atlanta from Boston.
I realized I could get him faster on phone. So he connected me with his assistant right after the text and said, hey, let's set up a time. And because of my restraints schedule-wise with my doctorate, I've got to wrap this thing up. So I got a 1-hour phone interview with him.
What were a couple of takeaways for you with Mark Miller?
One was that Chick-fil-A is just getting started. I mean, they're not even.
Wow.
People want to talk about how can an organization keep scaling, and I hung up the phone and I'm like, they have built a system around leadership that has only begun to pay out the fruit. And he told me this.
What do you mean by that?
He told me that the owner operators, which is, I mean, he greatly emphasized to me when we were talking on the phone. He said, 80% of our success is one thing. We select the best people. Wow. In fact, he said, I'm looking for Chick-fil-A owner operators, Chick-fil-A employees who don't work for us yet.
Wow.
That was his words.
Oh, my goodness.
He said, so I'm trying to find the best and then hire the best. And so what's happened over the last few decades is now 50 to 70% of their new owner operators are former Chick-fil-A employees, people who've grown up in the system.
Wow.
And that was Truett's desire from day one. He actually wrote in something, in my chapter, I wrote this quote from him that his son referenced, that a true measure of an owner-operator would not be the cells of chicken, but it would be the number of owner-operators that came out of that owner-operator. Isn't that good?
That's gold. Oh, that is
so here's Truett, who essentially invents the chicken sandwich.
Yeah.
But his greatest contribution was that he realized that the measure of a Chick-fil-A owner-operator was the owner-operators they could produce, not the chicken they could produce.
And they are strict. I mean, we went there and spent time with some of their execs, and they're strict. I mean, to become an owner-operator is an extensive process.
Yes. I live in Boston where Harvard is, and I came across this stat in studying. It's easier to get into Harvard than it is to become an owner-operator at Chick-fil-A. How about that?
I believe it. I believe it.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And he's unapologetic about it. He said, most restaurants want to hire managers. We want to hire CEOs.
All right. So after that conversation, how's that changing the way you're going to select leaders at Encounter Church? I mean, your church is what, 2 years old now?
We turned 3 this September. So
how's it going to change the way you select leaders?
No, it's good. Actually, it lit a fire under me. I hung up the phone and I was in the room by myself, and I was like, that guy is the smartest guy I've ever talked to. And because everything he said, it like hit me like with a ton of bricks. When I was reading the book of Acts later, I was like, everything he just said was exactly how Jesus built his church.
Yes.
I was like, I am a fool. It took me listening to Mark Miller talk about chicken sandwiches to make me realize that Jesus had already figured this thing out and taught the church how to do it. Like, we lost it.
Wow.
I wasn't finding it. I was rediscovering it. And it was that who is, when God wants to birth a what, he starts with a who. And that the quality of the who, it was crazy. I started thinking through the book, Acts 6. How do they solve a problem? With a person. The best persons.
And gave qualifications for what they were looking for.
And then it hits me. I'm like, oh, Paul did that.
Yeah.
He didn't speak about the what or the how of church leadership, but he spoke about the who of church leadership.
Yeah.
And so for us, internally, what's happened is we've started a really intensive discussion around defining what is it that makes a leader. What is a leader? And so we've settled on 5 characteristics, but we're even drilling down deeper to say, in a sentence, how do we say it? Mark Miller said this to me. He said, most organizations talk about all the ways that they're lacking. They have an insufficient amount of leadership. And we wanted to flip the equation and say, what would an organization look like that had a surplus of people waiting?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so it was like the early church, the assumption when Paul writes the book of Acts, chapter 6, is that there's this assumption that there are people waiting to step into leadership, that there's a surplus on what the Spirit's doing.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to say, let's clarify down to a sentence. And that's still an internal debate, but we have the 5 H's that's starting to gauge how we select leaders and have conversations with leaders.
It's a grid you look through in recruit. What are the 5 H's?
So the first is holy, because as a church, we do believe that it grows out of character. The humility piece that I think, to use C.S. Lewis's kind of succinct way of stating, it's not someone who thinks less of himself. It's someone who's in general, they have less thinking of themselves. And then we have the hustle aspect of what they're able to output. We have the hunger of what they're able to grow and this kind of desire to keep. And then the high EQ, someone who's relationally aware, self-aware. So as we're having conversations, we're kind of thinking through that frame. Like, do I see evidence? Do I like Acts 6? They go and say, give us 7 men who have a record of doing these things before we give them a responsibility to do these things.
Part of the selection process. Yes. What have they done in their past?
Yes.
Because that's going to tell you a lot about their future. Yeah.
So we're trying to come up with creative ways of discovering, do they have a record? Do they have a trajectory of those 5 H's already present? In our conversations with them. And that's how we're selecting our leaders now.
That's good. Hey, let me ask you this, because I was thinking about this recently. Sometimes as leaders, we get so focused on how do we select the right person? How do we select the right person? We get so focused on them, we forget about us. So what is it that we need to look at in ourselves to make sure we're good selectors, not just focusing on selectees?
That's really good. I think one of the things you've modeled this for me, who you were the first time I met you at a church planner assessment sparked a fire inside of me. To take it back to Mark Miller's conversation, the way he said it, right after he started at Chick-fil-a corporate in 1978, I think was around the year he begins, Dan Cathy, who hires him, says to him, your capacity to lead is directly connected to your capacity to learn.
Oh, man, that's gold.
And here is Mark Miller, who is I think his official title is senior vice president of high performance leadership. Yeah. And I realized this guy is not just a high capacity leader, he's a high capacity learner.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing is you model it, you sparked it in me, that for my team, I am the thermostat. And they're going to reflect what I am modeling. And that capacity to learn, that hunger to know I haven't arrived, to keep developing and growing, and becoming better in all the various aspects of who I am, I think is that key.
And when we get better as leaders, our team gets better. And it's funny because I met with Mark, 2 years ago. And one of the fascinating things when I was in our conversation, he said, and I won't mention the name of it, but there's a burger place out west that offered Chick-fil-a employees like $1,000 signing bonus.
No way.
Because they knew if they could hire somebody away from Chick-fil-A, they didn't have to develop them. Chick-fil-A already developed them.
So they're sniping Chick-fil-A employees.
Yes.
Because they've got that kind of reputation. That's incredible.
Yeah.